Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. United States Senator Tom Cotton joins me. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
I'm good, Hugh. Good to be on with you.
Well, I heard you threw shade at me last week when I was missing in action, but I will forgive that because you're here this week to talk about the blue bank bailout. I think this stinks to high heaven, Senator Cotton. What do you make of this?
Yeah, it does stink, Hugh. It's pretty much Joe Biden and progressive failures all the way down. You know, let's step back 2 years and remember they created the environment that caused Silicon Valley Bank and potentially other banks to fail. It was their reckless spending that created runaway inflation, which led to higher interest rates, which squeezed banks in so many different ways. But even looking back 6 months ago, they should have seen at the supervisory level what was happening in Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, bank analysts on Wall Street saw this. You can't take in demand deposits at 3, 4, 5% and invest them in treasuries that are at 1 or 2% for 5 or 10 years and not face that squeeze. And then 6 days ago, when it was clear that Silicon Valley Bank was on the verge of failing, they should have arranged some kind of shotgun wedding merger with a larger bank that had a stronger balance sheet. But I think the ideological opposition in the Democratic Party to any kind of merger, and frankly, just desiring state control of assets as opposed to private control, blocked that merger. And then even once Silicon Valley Bank went into receivership on Friday, they didn't have to bail out all the depositors. Now, the sympathetic parties here who are at no fault are the employees of the companies who had deposits at Silicon Valley Bank. But there were plenty of ways to protect those employees and ensure those companies could make payroll today and then again at the end of the month. The FDIC was talking about giving an advanced dividend of anywhere from 30 to 60% against the depositors' receivership certificates. Most of these companies are backed by big venture capital or private equity firms. Those firms could have fronted their payroll for 30, 60, 90 days if they were really such great companies. Or you had investors out there who are willing to buy receivership assets or receivership certificates for anywhere from 80 to 90 cents on the dollar, I've been told. Again, that would have made it easy for these companies to remain going concerns without the Biden bank bailout creating moral hazard now and in the future, and putting Arkansas banks and their customers on the hook to bail out these depositors at Silicon Valley Bank, to include Chinese companies. As everyone knows, Silicon Valley Bank was a entrepot for American money into China. So it's been progressive failures all the way down, and we may not be done with it yet.
Oh, I don't think we are done with it. I had Senator Blackburn on earlier. I asked her the same question I ask you now. If a rural bank in your state was going under, do you think you'd get a blue state bank bailout?
Well, Hugh, just to ask the question, I think answers itself. Of course, Joe Biden would not have bailed out some tiny bank that had facing failure in East Arkansas or South Arkansas, or even more to the point, let's just make it an apples-to-apples comparison, Hugh. Let's say an equal-sized bank with equally reckless management in Midland, Texas, that almost exclusively banks the oil and gas industry faced this failure. Do you think Joe Biden and his banking regulators would have manned the ramparts and done whatever it took to bail out all of those oil and gas company depositors?
That's a great example. You know, Senator Cotton, I've been asking people about Roku, and it's only because I know Roku and I use Roku, and I like Roku. But Roku is run by allegedly smart people, and they had $600 million or thereabout in the Silicon Valley Bank, of which $250,000 is insured. So $599,750,000 of Roku money is not insured on Friday when Joe Biden announces no blue bank bailout. Sunday night, blue bank bailout. What happened in between? I want to know every call that went to everyone in the White House, the FDIC, Janet Yellen, by every lobbyist in Washington, D.C. This is a connected bank getting to their connections and working their lobbyists to get a 180 out of Joe Biden. Of course, he made it worse by denying that it's a bailout and thereby by increasing instability in red banks. I think that's what he's done. I think the market is going to crash today in banking again, because they realize he's not going to do this for anybody who's not connected.
Yeah, well, Hugh, I can't speak about what any one depositor or company did or didn't do over the weekend, but I think there's no question that if you think about where this bank was located and the industry that it banked, as Mark Zuckerberg has said in testimony before the Congress, Silicon Valley is an extremely left-wing place, that you had a lot of Democratic donors and congressmen and local politicians like Gavin Newsom, who apparently had his own bank accounts at Silicon Valley Bank burning up the phones over the weekend, insisting that they get a bailout. Again, all these companies had different ways to access their funds or to get credit on those funds. You know, the FDIC had put out word on Friday and Saturday that they were prepared to do an advanced dividend of 30 to 60% of the one's receivership certificate against uninsured deposits. Those receivership certificates can be sold still today on the market if people want to get access to their cash quickly and reestablish a banking relationship with a going concern bank.
Senator,
there's no question that lots of Democrats are burning up the phones to the Democrats and Joe Biden's administration.
That's what I just want to know who called the White House over the weekend. I will close with this on this before we move to Ukraine. The Intercept reported yesterday that Governor Newsom did not tell anybody while he lobbied for the bailout that he had three businesses, Cade, Odette, and Pump Check, three wineries owned by Newsom, clients of SVB. If that is in fact correct, should Gavin Newsom be testifying before the House Oversight Committee or the Banking Committee?
Well, he might end up testifying for a grand jury as well, if that's correct. I do think that there's probably a lot of feather bedding among people who were pumping the administration full of panic to get them to bail out Silicon Valley Bank, or who were around on Twitter all day long, all weekend long, talking about how the entire banking.
So now, Senator, I want to turn to Ukraine. Yesterday, Marco Rubio was on the show, and he made a lot of news because he suggested that Governor DeSantis' statement to Tucker Carlson about Ukraine was erroneous and perhaps not based in deep foreign policy experience. You know Ron DeSantis. He knows what he's doing when it comes to national security. And I think too much weight was put on that statement. But what does Tom Cotton think about the national security interests of the United States that are at play in Ukraine?
So, Hugh, as I've said before, I think we have vital national security interests in stopping Russia's unprovoked war of aggression in Ukraine. What we need in Europe is a stable, durable, lasting peace, so we're not always facing a potential two-front conflict when our biggest challenge is China in the Western Pacific. And anything short of that stable, durable peace is going to be a kind of festering wound that continues to take American attention, American forces away from China. The only way to get to that kind of stable solution is for Vladimir Putin to think he has more to lose on the battlefield than he does at the negotiating table. That's the only reason we will have a negotiated settlement that's satisfactory to Ukrainians in this battle. For 22 years, Vladimir Putin has not sat down at the negotiating table when he starts this kind of conflict because he always thinks he can get more on the battlefield than he can at the negotiating table. That's why I've said from the beginning that the Biden administration has failed to provide Ukraine the weapons it needs in a timely fashion to defend its own territory. That's what needs to happen now.
Now, I am concerned that the axis of evil, the new one, Beijing as its capital, Putin and Khamenei as his vassal state operators, his authoritarians under their control, is becoming very much one block, and it's run by Beijing. So that what happens in Ukraine very much affects what is being thought in Beijing. What do you think Beijing thinks of Joe Biden's policy?
So I think Xi Jinping and Chinese communists are watching carefully what happens in Ukraine. They're probably surprised by the shortcomings of the Russian military, probably question whether their own military is misrepresenting their capabilities to them. That kind of uncertainty is a good thing. But they're also watching Western resolve as well. And if the West, and especially President Biden, falters after a mere 13 months in their view, since they think in terms of decades or generations or centuries, a mere 13 or 15 or 18 months, that there is no chance that Joe Biden and the West will stand united against the Chinese invasion of Taiwan in a year or 2 or 3 years, a small island on the other side of the world where Europe has no cultural or historic or linguistic or religious ties. So I think very much what happens in Ukraine could influence Xi Jinping's thinking on whether and when to go for the jugular in Taiwan.
Now, you're a member of the Intel Committee, Senator. Can you find out the Chinese Communist Party connected companies that banked at SBV through the Intel Committee?
I don't need the Intel Committee. Obviously, it's widely known in Silicon Valley and Washington that Silicon Valley Bank was an access point for Chinese companies to get American capital. And in almost all cases, those companies are linked, influenced, or associated with the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. And these are not just companies coming up with pleasurable apps for the Chinese people to pass their spare time. China wants access to foreign capital to continue to fuel its rise, and inherent in its system of state-directed economics is the tie between those companies and the PLA and the CCP.
Let me put three dots on a map for you, Senator. Theranos, Sam Bankman-Fried, and now SBV. Is there a cultural problem in Silicon Valley? And let me add Stanford Law School, acting like children. So there are four dots. Can we diagnose something based upon four disconnected but geographically proximate scandals?
In a lot of those cases, too, you had business people who were celebrating left-wing causes and essentially buying themselves political risk insurance when they should have been buying themselves interest rate risk insurance, celebrating Democratic Party or progressive causes, basically putting down a future put option that if they got in trouble, they could run off to their pals in Washington, D.C. and hope to be bailed out, as Silicon Valley Bank was.
Now, let's close there, Senator. If a bank crisis occurs today, and the markets indicate one, Moody's downgraded the whole banking sector, I think the president has to come out and say, everything that we did for SBV and Signature, we will do for every bank in America. It's a lot of money, but I think he has to say that for depositors. Otherwise, we could have a real crisis on our hands. What will be your reaction if he says that? We have a minute.
Well, I don't want to speculate about what might happen in the market today or what the Biden administration's response might be, but it's clearly been a failure of Silicon Valley Bank, and I'm afraid we'll find some other banks when it comes to just its own managers' risk management practices, but the Biden administration supervision responsibilities. And I certainly hope that they are carefully examining all the banks that might face similar kinds of interest rate risks and urging them to take immediate steps to protect themselves and therefore their depositors against those risks.
Yeah, keep that Midland Bank, Texas hypothetical in mind. That is truly illustrative of the problem that we face with two legal systems and two political systems for banks. Senator Tom Cotton, always a pleasure. Thank you, Senator. Coming back with James Rosen talking about Scalia. Stay tuned.